Enregistré. Okay, well, today I'm very happy to be talking to Denigrata herself, heavy metal. Would you say extreme metal or heavy metal?
Yes, extreme metal.
Extreme metal musician, Denigrata herself. So welcome. Firstly, I'd really like to know about the different types of metal music and why did you choose extreme metal?
Okay, so there are a lot of different subgenres under the umbrella term of metal, and we, us metalheads do really like our categories. So I think certainly in extreme metal there are 3 or 4 predominant subgenres: death metal, black metal, thrash, doom, grindcore. And they all offer you something different. They all do something different. But then, if metal is the wider umbrella term, my goodness, we could be here for quite a long time working out the genealogy of these things. Metal Hammer magazine quite a while ago did actually a huge pull-out poster of all the genealogies, because you're going back to the 1970s, you're going back to Black Sabbath, and from which everything else has developed.
Yeah.
For those of us that are extreme metal adherents, I think probably I spent probably somewhere between 15 and 18 years as a death metal guitarist, and then I stopped for a while because I actually needed a bit of a break. And touring all over the UK, Europe, and it's brilliant, but it's not like there's not any money in it, but we don't do it for the money. And then I spent the last 5 years as the guitarist and frontwoman in a black metal band called Denigrata, and Denigrata herself is my alter ego in the band. And these musical forms give you different things. And so I think, if you look at the work of Robert Walser in his book called Running with the Devil, he talks a lot about empowerment fantasies. So when you're listening to metal, it offers you something that nothing else can. I mean, some classical actually kind of comes close in some respects, but it's an awful lot to do with your sonic texture and your soundscapes, the intricacy of the compositions. If you listen to death metal, for example, let's choose a good one, say the band Decapitated. If you listen to their album Nihility, there is hardly any silence in the entire album. You'd get like a stop and a start of like literally one beat, and then boom, you're straight back in again. What I would probably term as like a riffarama. So there's no let up. You listen to Meshuggah, there is no let up. It's this constant barrage. So your ears can almost feel like they're under attack. And that's to somebody that perhaps doesn't know this music, or is, if you look at Theodore Adorno's listener typography, they're probably beginners. They wouldn't class themselves as kind of expert listeners. But for me now, if I listen to that sort of music, which I do a lot, my ears just feel like they've come home. It's just instantly warm and enveloping. And I find the guitar distortion to be really warm and organic. Black metal is a different kettle of fish, as we say in England. And whilst it is predominantly a Scandinavian preoccupation, certainly from the 90s onwards, I mean, you had examples before that with like Celtic Frost and Merciful Fate and sort of what like blackened thrash, but it didn't really find its genesis point until the 1990s, and then a lot of really bad stuff happened, as I'm sure people kind of know about, and it's been written about a lot. The Norwegian media got kind of obsessed about it, because it was a really big thing that was going on, murders and all sorts, and I'm not sure it's ever really fully recovered from that, and it's quite problematic. So for me to play black metal now, I've had to kind of dig deeper as to why that is. So for me, black metal is what the abyss sounds like. It's this open void where you can step into it, and that's where it becomes this crucible where you can make your music. And with death metal, I never found that. It was much more that I was working to this ascribed set of rules that were already in existence. And, and that's not to say that doesn't happen with black metal, because, you've got, 20, 30 years worth of music history that's gone before you. But I found more freedom with black metal composition and performance, because it's so theatrical. You can really divorce yourself from who you are, than I ever did with death metal, which is interesting. I've been in one grindcore band. The songs are notoriously short. I think I had to learn like 50 songs, and that was like 20 minutes worth of set, which is ridiculous. And you've got the complete opposite with black metal and death metal, because you can have like 14, 15-minute, opuses. Never been in a doom band. It didn't do enough for me, but I mean, that's my personal taste. I needed something more layered, more intricate, more complicated. I think that's probably got quite a lot to do with the fact that I'm neurodivergent. So I'm on the autism spectrum. So I have autism and ADHD. So I purposefully seek out complicated music forms for my performance and for my listening pleasure, because I need to engage with music that has been thought through, and each bar of music has been exploited, so there's literally nothing left for it to give. Which I suppose is actually quite an avant-garde compositional framework, really. But so what does metal give you, the listener? You get a sonic texture with metal that you don't really get with anything else, and your head becomes enveloped in it, and you can't really perform metal. If you're going to be involved in metal, then you are involved in metal 110%. You are a guitarist, you're a vocalist, you're a promoter, you're a sound engineer, you're out there, doing all the flyering. It's such a community-based effort and a community spirit that's involved. And I'm not saying it's not without its problems, because it has plenty. We can't fully divorce ourselves away from the dominant discourse, can we? But I find it a freer space to exist than I do within the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. I'm really taken with the idea that there are rules in metal.
So many rules. I mean, there are compositional rules. There are compositional rules, and there are cultural rules. Mm-hmm. And I think that the compositional rules for me are far easier to engage with. I found the cultural rules much more complicated and troublesome. I mean, I spent the first 18 years on stage. I shared the stage with one band in all that time that had other women in it. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it really was just me, and I was one of the lads. And it's not that it really bothered me particularly. I was always kind of a bit flummoxed as to why there weren't more women on stage performing and playing guitar or drums or whatever. And I think that's got an awful lot to do with accessibility. And I purposefully made a choice that I was going to ignore all of those rules, and I was going to do it anyway. I'm really glad that I did.
So I actually have had the same experiences, because I've usually been, as a saxophonist, I've very often been the only woman in the band. And likewise, I was one of the boys. And if I turned up in my gig gear, in a dress, people would naturally assume I was the singer. But
there is that.
Be the singer. How sexist is that?
So well, I've often had people sort of, I'm carrying equipment in. If you're in a metal band, that's a lot of kit.
Yep.
Drummers usually got a 20-piece drum kit, double kit pedals a lot, and and I can see people looking at me and they're like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Well, I'm about to set up and play our sound check, if that's all right." But there's a really awesome book by Lena Dawes, Dawes, and it's called "What Are You Doing Here?" And it's about a black woman's journey as a heavy metal fan. And it's an absolutely stunningly good book. So yeah, big props to Lena, because she's awesome.
That sounds fantastic. So can you tell me, how does it feel when you're performing? Is a very complex?
Well, if the sound engineer has got my guitar tone right, and it obviously has to be right on my guitar head first, there is literally nothing better than me kicking my distortion pedal on and hearing it not only from my amp, but through the monitors in front of me, because then I'm like sandwiched in the middle. I've got distortion on one side and distortion on the other, and there's little old me in the middle, and it's awesome. It's just so, nothing else matters. No, sorry, Metallica. Nothing else matters. And, you know, the world could be falling, well, the world kind of is falling apart, but in that moment, it's just you and the music. It's you and your bandmates. It's you and your audience. And it's the most extraordinary experience. And honestly, there isn't anything that's comparable. There's, you know, you ask any performer, I'm sure they'd say something very similar. But you are just, music takes you over, and you are happy to let that happen. And I can't think of, you know, any other scenario. Maybe you, well, there are perhaps a couple, but I won't mention them. But it's not, where you are happy to let your sense of self and your sense of free will be suddenly given over to something else. And it's not like it's particularly owned by people. It's not somebody else's will. It's this performative, compositional creativity that you've had a hand in, that is the most incredible thing. I don't think anybody can be.
It's a transcendence, isn't it? That
completely.
That moment where you're not playing, it's playing itself.
It's playing you. Yeah, I'm not, absolutely. I'm not a religious person, and I would probably say that I have had divine experiences only when I am on stage. And it's almost as if, and I'm sure that, you know, everybody can say this, that you're playing a song, you know, you're playing the riff, whichever, and then all of a sudden your brain goes, look what you're doing, you're playing a gig. And you're like, no, and you have to kind of shut that voice up, because otherwise you've then lost track where you are. And if you're playing extreme metal, you can't take your eye off the ball for a second. The live sound on stage for extreme metal is usually really awful, and so if you can't hear your ride cymbal, often in gigs you'll probably see me leaning back a little bit, because I'm stood at the front of the stage and I've got to hear what my drummer's doing.
Exactly.
Because, you know, if you're only as good as your drummer. I'll say that much.
You're only ever as good as the rhythm section.
Absolutely, like 100%. It's so reliant on them. And it's always really hot, really loud, really smoky. The lights are flashing, so your sensory capabilities are often really restricted, and you're having to. I rely on my ears so much, because you can't see anything really. So it's all down to my ears.
Yeah. So talking of ears, and you've talked about monitors. So I mean, everything used to be back in the day all about fold-back monitors. But now people have in-ear earpieces. I mean, would that ever work for you?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think they're good at what they do, but I need to hear beyond that. So if I've got one ear that's been completely cut, if even just talking now, if you put your hand over your ear, all I can hear is me, or what's directly going into that one particular ear, and my concentration is drawn to that rather than the larger sounds that are going on around me. And in order for you to have that sense of total immersion in what you're doing, I couldn't risk having any of my senses cut off like that, especially not my ears.
And would you say that
my eyesight's not great anyway, so I don't wear my glasses on stage, but I'm so reliant on my ears.
Yeah, well, it strikes me that what you're talking about is a musical space, but it's actually the space that the music's happening in. But, you know, if you have anything that's too personal, just going direct.
Yeah, it's cutting too much out.
Yeah.
And just going back to what you were saying about musical space, like for anyone who's mixed metal or done any mastering, you'll know full well how much space metal takes up when you're recording it. So you take that guitar distortion out, suddenly you've got loads of room. You're like, oh my god, this is great. You put that distortion back in, it's like whomp, all the space has just gone. And then if you've got bass distortion and then you've got screaming or growling instead of singing vocals, there is literally no room left. So how you choose to then engineer it literally is down to like the micromillimeter of how much space you've actually got. And it's no different live. And in fact, it's more difficult because you've got some instruments on stage that are notoriously muddy and difficult to engineer live, and that is your double bass kick drums. So if someone's got a triggered kit, you can just go straight into the desk, fine, but you are going to sound like a computer, and it sounds like this tick 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 instead of a thump, which is really what you want from it.
Yeah.
But because they're going at such a rate, particularly if you're playing, like tech metal, something like that, if you like, so I've mentioned Decapitated and Meshuggah, or Necrophagist even, like, because they're all jazz musicians, and they've got behind, they do loads of metal composition. It's just mind-blowingly good. So you need to have such cleverly crafted engineering with what you're doing. Otherwise, your poor drummer is on stage and he's, they're working their asses off, and then the people in the audience can't. They're like, what? And they can't hear anything. So you've got all that effort that's just being lost on stage. So that the relationship between the band and the sound engineer has to be symbiotic. It has to be respectful. It has to be friendly, because if you don't have that, then it's very, very difficult to get a good live sound if you're playing extreme metal.
Thank you so much. Well, as well as being an extreme metal musician, you're also an academic, and your doctoral research was on music and trauma. How difficult was it to research such an emotive topic?
Yeah, it was hard. But because I was using autoethnography, so I was using my own experiences as data for my research. So my experiences in the band, what I was able to take to band rehearsals, whatever I had experienced had a home. I was able to use that as not only a performative space, but a cathartic one.
So
and this is why I have, sorry?
Safe space, actually playing.
It was, well, yeah, but black metal is not a safe music form, quite the opposite.
It doesn't
but
feel
I found it to be regenerative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it to be more regenerative. So I was able to take my personal experiences and my trauma and go, here you go. Here's all the lyrics. Here's this riff that I've created. What should we do with it? And then everybody worked together, and then we would, we wrote an album. I mean, that seemed to kind of appear relatively quickly. We wrote it in probably about 6 months, recorded it, got it out really quick. We did our first album launch. I mean, I didn't tell them what we were doing, but we did. Black metal and churches don't have a very good relationship. They usually get burnt. And we did our album launch in a 900-year-old round church. I just told them we were doing like an avant-garde performance, which is not untrue. But yeah, luckily no one from the church actually turned up, so we got away with it. But it was just the most extraordinary relationship, because I found the more I understood about the compositional structures of black metal, the more I realized that, in very Nietzschean terms, I suppose, I was stepping into the abyss. And in order for me to heal, that's exactly what I needed to do. So it's almost like I instinctively knew the only way through that was by black metal performance. And I managed to write my PhD on it, and I've got a monograph coming out on it. And I'm sure that most metalheads would say something similar, but I've actually lost count the amount of times that metal saved my life. And on this particular instance, this was the biggest one. So I will always be grateful. And black metal has it's difficult to say this. There is a subsection in black metal called NSBM, which is National Socialist Black Metal, and it is as hideous as you can imagine. So, you think, oh, great, Nazis are back. And it's not like they weren't always kind of there in the punk scene, because the punks have always kicked them out and did a good job of dealing with it. But then it all starts to filter through into other little areas of music, and it starts very slowly to grow. And then you have bands that all seem to share this ideology, and then they have a fandom, and then it all starts to grow. and I've had to really question, well, you know, that's not what black metal is as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, it's what the abyss sounds like. So how on earth does this very awful ideology start to creep in and have an impact on music? It's music. You know, I don't want to sound like an apologist, because I've been pretty hard on Wagner, but you know, he did say some really awful things, and they were in his own words. So, you know, but I think there is this element in black metal, and there's a lot of bands that are really kicking back against it, and that are anti-fascist black metal. I mean, what a beautiful thing. So Dawn Raid, Us, Neckbeard Death Camp, which is just a great name, and just really wanting to kind of say, well, look, this is not what this music form is to us. It may be to you, but I think you've been misled. Because how can a riff convey Nazi ideology? It's a riff, it's a piece of music, it's a collection of notes. That's not how this works. If you look at the theorist, and they were also in the band called Liturgy, New York, I think. Hunter Hunt Hendricks, I'm a huge fan of their work, and they purposefully split up black metal into two different sections. So you have the Hyperborean, which is the Scandinavian movement of the 1990s, and then you have the stuff that's kind of around now, which they call transcendental, because it has a differentiated purpose. So there are two main categories, I think, in terms of compositional and performance elements of black metal, and that is speed picking or tremolo picking, and blast beats, which consists of your double bass feet doing this, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, and with every hit of your foot, your snare is hitting each time. So
Wow.
it sounds like a cannonade. If there was ever a point where a human being could almost sound like a computer, it's a blast beat. And you have different sorts of blast beats as well. You have a traditional blast beat, you have a gravity blast, there's all sorts of different sorts. And the staple diet, if you like, of kind of traditional, more orthodox forms of black metal is that kind of tremolo picking with a blast beat. But with the transcendental, like bands like Wolves in the Throne Room, who are, I think, are just incredible. You can see by the look on my face how much I adore that band. If you listen to the track called Ex Cathedra off the album Black Cascade, oh my god, you've never heard a more beautiful riff in your life. It's stunning. And they'll have the blast beat, but then what they'll do is that they'll crack that blast beat, they'll stop that kind of rigid formation, and they'll drop the snare so it moves into a syncopated beat. So this blast beat suddenly bursts, and the riff suddenly just blooms in front of you. It is the most incredible thing. So it doesn't negate any of the structures that have gone before, but it's pushing it into a new direction. So you have new ontologies and epistemologies that come out through transcendental black metal. It's quite a beautiful thing. So I get quite passionate about that.
Really? Well, that's amazing. Thank you. So what have you got, what are you working on at the moment?
Well, as I'm a newly minted indie scholar, I'm a very newly proud member of the National Coalition of Independent Scholars. Whoop, whoop. I am now working on, I'm about halfway through composing a Requiem Mass, and that's for a full choir and an orchestra and probably some popular music instruments as well, because I can't divorce myself from the beauty of that. I'm just working on the Lacrimosa at the moment. I have the Mozart one sat next to me right now. I'm looking at it. So I'm doing that. I'm co-editing 2 new volumes. One is on metal and disability, and the other one is the second volume. Where are you? To this. Can you see that? Music and Death.
That looks familiar. Yes.
Yes, it does. Yeah, through Emerald Publishing, and so we're just currently working on that at the moment. And I'm really, this is my first time kind of co-editing stuff, and so I'm pretty busy. I mean, the Requiem, the Requiem is taking up quite a lot of time, as I anticipated. I mean, of course it would, but I'm also starting a new project. In Denigrata, there was another woman in the band, and she was the one who did all the operatic vocals, and she and I have decided to write some music together again.
Oh, wow.
So we are planning on doing that.
That's cool.
So we're right at the beginning of that.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Maybe you could send me a link if there are any recordings out there.
We haven't got any yet, but we've only met twice. It's quite difficult in lockdown. She lives at the other end of the country, so we're having to do everything by Skype. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Good. Well, thank you so much. It's just wonderful. You're so passionate.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
I get to talk about my favourite thing.
It can't be bad, can it? Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.